Thanks so much for joining us today. God wants to do so much for you and through you, and we'd love to hear about it. Take a moment to send your story to stories@parkerhill.org. And if you'd like to partner with us financially, you can do that by going to parkerhill.org/give and choose the giving option that works best for you. Well, thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoy today's message.
Yes, that is a really funny and also really accurate picture of the way that so many people go through life, isn't it? Just trying to keep up with everybody else, even if it makes you go broke. I think Dave Ramsey said it well. He said, we buy things we can't afford with money we don't have to impress people that we don't even like. Well, this is week number 2 in this series called The Comparison Trap. And during this series, we're talking about how we often go through life looking around at how other people live and what other people have, and then we compare ourselves to them and then make decisions based on those comparisons, and it is a trap. And we're going to talk about this idea of the comparison trap in a very practical, even sometimes fairly personal way today. But before we jump in, let me give a big welcome to those of you joining us by video at other locations. Big shout out to those of you at our Clark Summit campus with your awesome campus pastor there, Dan White, and a big shout out to our Wilkes-Barre campus with your equally awesome campus pastor, Errol Morgan. Great to have you guys here today. And also those of you watching online, great to have you guys joining us. And if you do live within a 30-minute drive of one of our locations, we'd love to have you join us in person next weekend for the full experience. But today, as we continue this series, The Comparison Trap, I thought I'd begin today with just a question, a one-question quiz, a trivia question, and it's this one. What is the most popular tourist destination in the United States? If you think you know the answer to that question, turn to somebody next to you and venture a guess. The most popular tourist destination in the United States, what is it? Go ahead, venture a guess. Tell somebody next to you. Show them how smart you are. All right, probably some of you guessed the Grand Canyon. That's a good guess. They get 6 million visitors every year, but not the most popular destination. Some of you might have guessed Niagara Falls. My family and I were there earlier this summer, loved it, had a great time in Niagara Falls. It felt like there were 14 million people there the day we were there, but they get about 14 million visitors a year. I'm sure a lot of you guessed Disney World, Magic Kingdom, Orlando, Florida. 21 million people in a typical year visit that tourist destination, but none of those are the most popular tourist destination in the United States. The most popular tourist destination is the Mall of America. 40 million visitors in 2016. On any given week, there are visitors to the Mall of America from all 50 states. Now, for those of you who don't get out much, the Mall of America is in Minneapolis. It's this huge mall, largest mall in the United States, 500 stores. It's got an indoor amusement park with a full-size roller coaster. The Mall of America even has a chapel where you can get married. I am not making that up. 7,000 people have gotten married at the Mall of America. And the Mall of America is the #1 tourist destination in the United States for this reason. Because we love to shop. We love buying stuff, which is kind of surprising to me because we live in one of the most affluent nations in the world, and yet it seems like we never have enough. We seem to have this innate hunger for more and more and more. And don't get me wrong, I love my stuff too. I like the thrill of buying something new, but here's the problem. Our pursuit of more can eventually become a trap. In fact, here are some statistics. 79% of Americans say that their personal finances have kept them awake at night. Like 8 out of every 10 Americans, richest country in the world, have been awake at night worrying about their finances. 60% of Americans say they experience high levels of financial stress, and 56% of all divorces are a result of financial tension in the home. In fact, survey after survey would tell you that the #1 reason why divorce often happens is not kids or in-laws or even sex. Oftentimes, the biggest issue is money. Now, here's the thing. I don't think God wants this for his people, and I don't want this for us, because that's no way to live. But I believe perhaps the biggest driving factor behind all of this is comparison. It really is. I said this last week, 200 years ago, you lived on a farm with your spouse and 3 kids, and you went to town once a month to get supplies. So you didn't really have that many opportunities to compare your lifestyle to somebody else's. But in today's world, it's completely different. We are constantly comparing what we have with what is out there. Every day we're surrounded by reminders of what we don't have, right? Every TV commercial, every magazine advertisement, every billboard out there, every catalog that shows up in your mailbox, every e-commerce site online is reminding you of what you don't have. In fact, you go online to order something and it says, you might also like this. And people who bought that also bought this. In fact, technology has gotten to the point where you can be on your computer and an ad will just pop up. And it's an ad that's specifically targeted to you based on your buying habits. I mean, this is the world that we live in today. Every day we're surrounded by messages that remind us of what we don't have, and we can get stuck in this comparison trap, comparing what we have with what we could have, and we start feeling like we're kind of missing something. Like, I don't have the clothes I should have. I don't have the eyewear I should have. My TV isn't big enough. My surround sound isn't surroundy enough. My house is so 1990s. I don't have enough pottery for my barn. I just don't have what I need. And so we live in this world where we're constantly presented with what we don't have, and we're comparing what we have with what we could have, and it leads to this sense of discontentment, and it's a trap. So today, I want to talk about how to avoid this comparison trap when it comes to how we manage this very practical part of our lives. Let me give you a principle. If I could boil everything down that I want to say today into one sentence, one warning, it would be this: that contentment ends where comparison begins. As we begin to compare our lives to someone else's life, when we begin to compare, what we have to what someone else may have, those comparisons lead to dissatisfaction and discontentment and eventually lead us into a trap. This idea is explained very, very well in a part of the Bible called 1 Timothy chapter 6. And 1 Timothy is a book of the Bible. Actually, it was a letter in the first century written by Paul. We call him the Apostle Paul, to a young man by the name of Timothy. That's where we get that very creative name for this book of the Bible, 1 Timothy. And Timothy was a young man that Paul was developing into a leader. Timothy lived in Ephesus. Paul was writing this letter from Rome, helping Timothy to become the leader he needed to be for the Christians in Ephesus. And so in chapter 6 here, he talks to him about the dangers of comparison and the need for contentment. Let me read through it for you, then we'll come back and look at it more closely. He says this: godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it, but if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Skip to verse 17. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. Paul is saying this to Timothy: contentment ends where comparison begins. And so if we're going to avoid the comparison trap, I think there are 3 things that we need. I want to give you 3 things that will help you avoid the comparison trap. And the first thing is this: I believe that we need a reality check. We need a reality check about the true nature of our material possessions. And I think there are 2 questions we have to ask ourselves. Number 1, what is eternal? Number 2, what is essential? Let's start with that first question. What is eternal? It says this: godliness with contentment is great gain. In other words, the richest people in the world are not Bill Gates or Warren Buffett. The richest people in the world are those who have an authentic relationship with God and a heart that is at peace. Godliness with contentment is great gain. Why is that gain? Here's why. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. And we all know that, don't we? You come into this world naked and broke, you're going to leave this world the same way. All that stuff that you work so hard for, all that stuff that you pile up, all that stuff you put on your credit card, all that stuff your kids fight over, all that stuff you insure, all that stuff you put in your storage area, it's all so temporary. When you go, it stays here. My wife and I, years ago, we lived on a property that was right next to a landfill. And whenever I would come and go, I would often drive by that landfill. And sometimes when driving by the landfill, I would see some of the trucks in there unloading their cargo. You know, not just household garbage, but also sometimes possessions that were worn out. And as I would drive by, I would see these things being bulldozed and buried underground, possessions that people bought and paid a lot of money for, things that, children fought over at one time, possessions that husbands and wives had disputes about buying, things that people paid money for that they put on credit cards or worked overtime to buy, all of it just being buried by bulldozers. And I would drive by there and I would remind myself of the true nature of our possessions, that eventually everything I own is going to end up in one of those places. It all will. By the way, if you want a great family outing, take your family to a landfill, pack a lunch, sit in the car, watch the trucks come and go, and talk to your kids about the true nature of material things. It's a really cheap family outing, and you won't have to drive far because we have a lot of landfills around here, so that's the good thing. And remind them we brought nothing into the world, we can take nothing out of it. Now, does that mean we shouldn't have material things? No. Does it mean we shouldn't enjoy material things? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It just means that we better not cling to them too tightly and pursue them to the point where we neglect what matters most in this life, which is loving God and loving others. So let me ask you a question. When you're gone, what will you leave behind besides your stuff? Because we're all going to leave our stuff behind. But what are you going to leave behind that is going to last forever? What will have an eternal impact? We need a reality check. So the first question is, what is eternal? Here's the second question in this reality check, and that is the question, what is essential? Or to phrase it a little bit differently, what do we need and what do we just want? Because let's be honest, it's really easy in our culture today to get those two things confused. It's really easy in this world of constant comparison to blur the lines between what we really need and what we want. And I love verse 8 here because it gives us so much clarity. Godliness with contentment is great gain. We brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. I mean, that's so clear, isn't it? You got food to eat, you got clothes to wear, you got someplace to lay your head at night that's out of the weather. You have got everything that you need. Anything beyond that is a want. It's icing on the cake. And my kids will tell you that I talk about this with them all the time, like to the point where they're nauseated by it. Like we'll be driving somewhere and one of my kids will say, "Hey, Dad, can we stop at the store because I need, fill in the blank." And I'll say, "You need it or you want it?" And they'll say, "Oh, Dad, I guess I just want it." And usually I'll get them whatever they want anyway. But I just want them to know the difference. I want them to grow up knowing the difference between what is an actual need. What do I actually need in this life? And what is beyond that? What is just a want? What is just a blessing beyond that? And by the way, my kids aren't the only ones who are guilty of that. I'll walk into Home Depot or Target to get the one thing I need. And I'll walk out with the one thing I need and 10 things I saw that I just wanted. I'll go on Amazon just to poke around and see, what kind of deals there are. And by the way, I've got Amazon Prime. So that means because of my annual membership fee, I get free shipping. And so it's kind of like poor stewardship not to buy something because the shipping is free, right? And honestly, I'll have packages show up at my house and I'm like, I don't remember what I ordered. What's in that box? Did I order something? I mean, I'm on a first-name basis with a UPS guy. We're going to have him over for Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, that's my weakness, Amazon Prime. And so like all of us, I got to keep coming back to this reality check. What is essential? What do I need? A few years ago, I read a book on prayer by Philip Yancey, and in that book he tells this story. He says, a spiritual seeker interrupted his busy life to spend a few days in a monastery. I hope your stay is a blessed one, said the monk who showed the visitor to his room. If you need anything, let us know, and we'll teach you how to live without it. I love that. Sometimes we just got to teach ourselves how to live without some things. We just have to avoid the comparison trap by reminding ourselves on a regular basis that we already have pretty much everything we need, and everything else is just a want. And that will help you avoid that discontentment, dissatisfaction, the comparison trap. I was preparing this message, and I couldn't help but think about my wife's grandfather. My wife's grandfather passed away 11 years ago at the age of 100. He was almost 101. I actually did his funeral service. And he was a great guy and a very interesting guy. Right up until the end of his life, he was healthy. His mind was really sharp. He was on a bowling league until in his mid-99th year. He was 99, still bowling. He was a great guy. And the thing I remember the most, though, about Grandpa Brown was his simplicity, his humility, his contentment. This is a guy that worked at the same job for 45 years. He worked at Agway. He and his wife lived in the same little 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom home for 40 years. She still lives there today. They never had central air or granite countertops or a hot tub. You know, they never owned a cell phone or stainless steel appliances. They never went to Cancun or Disney. He just worked hard, paid his bills, raised some great kids, kept his word, and was faithful to God. He wasn't wealthy, but he was one of the richest men I've ever known, because godliness with contentment is great gain. And every once in a while, we just need a reality check, and we got to remind ourselves, okay, what is eternal and what is essential? Now, we not only need a reality check, I think today we also need this. We need a wake-up call. We need a wake-up call, and in the next section here, verses 9 and 10, there's really a powerful warning about the dangers of falling in to the comparison trap, the danger of getting sucked in by dissatisfaction and discontentment. The next couple of verses describe what can happen to us. It says, those who want to get rich, and let me stop and say something there. It doesn't say those who are rich, okay? There is absolutely nothing wrong with being wealthy. If your wealth is acquired in the right way and handled in the right way, it is a blessing from God. This is actually talking about those who struggle with contentment, those who always want just a little bit more, those whose hearts are never satisfied with what they have. Those who want to get rich, here's what happens to them. They fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And notice it doesn't say money is a root of all kinds of evil. Money is simply a tool. Money can do a lot of good things. Money can feed a hungry person. Money can give shelter to a homeless person. Money can put a child in a good school. So money in and of itself is not evil. It can be used for good or evil. It says the love of money, when that is your passion, when that is the thing that you're seeking in life, the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money, discontent, dissatisfied, always comparing. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Do you hear how strong that is? Did you see those highlighted words in there? Words like trap, ruin and destruction, harmful desires, many griefs. See, this is a wake-up call that all of us need. Years ago, hunters in Africa had a very interesting and very effective way of capturing monkeys. They would take a coconut and they would hollow out the coconut, and then they would leave a hole in it that was just large enough for a monkey to get his hand in there, but when he clenched his fist, he could not pull it back out again. And then they would take that coconut and they would tie it or chain it to a tree or a rock so it was anchored, and then they would put inside that coconut some fruit. And eventually a monkey would come along, and the monkey would smell the food, reach in there, grab a hold of it, and try to pull his hand back out, his or her hand back out, and not be able to get it out. And they would not let go of the food, but keep pulling, even injuring their hand, even holding on to the point where the hunter could come and throw a net over them and capture them. And I've always thought that this is a metaphor for the way that so many of us live today. We chase things and we grab hold of things and we grasp at things, and in our grasping and in our grabbing, we trap ourselves like people who are living a lifestyle that's way beyond their means, and they're feeling all the financial pressure of that. Like married couples who deal with all kinds of stress and conflict because they're holding on to things too tightly and pursuing things too hard and wanting way too much of this world's material things. Like kids who grow up believing that they're not valued because both parents are working so many hours just to get the bills paid. We need a wake-up call. We need a reality check. We need a wake-up call. One more thing that we need this. We need an attitude adjustment. In other words, I think for those of us who are followers of Christ, we need to look at money and possessions. We need to look at the material things of this world with an entirely different attitude than the rest of this world. So you skip down to verse 17. It says this, command those who are rich in this present world. I have to stop here and talk about this because this part right here, this is the part that most people write off. You know, a lot of you may be reading that and saying, oh, whew, that doesn't apply to me because I'm certainly not rich. That's them, right? That's those people who are 2 or 3 steps ahead of me financially. That's what this is all about. Can I tell you something? From a global perspective and a historical perspective, every single one of us in this room is rich. We really are. In fact, years ago, I read a very interesting book. It's entitled The Progress Paradox, How Life Gets Better While People Feel Worse. Really interesting book, and in the front part of this book, the author gives all kinds of statistics about how life has gotten dramatically better for us over about the last century. He gives some statistics such as these. At the beginning of the 20th century, the average American lifespan was 41 years. I'd be dead by now. Now it's 77 years. In the 1940s, the average new home was 1,100 square feet. And by the way, back in the 1940s, most people had an average of like 4 kids back then. 1,100 square feet. Today, it's 2,400 square feet. In 1890, less than 1% of American households earned the equivalent of $75,000 in today's dollars. Today, 23% of American households are at that point. Then he kind of gives this summary statistic here. Today, the average American lives better than 99.4% of all the human beings who have ever lived. Do you realize that? Do you know you're rich? You can go home tonight and you can say, hey, honey, let's go out to dinner. I just found out we're rich. Let's go have a nice steak dinner. We are rich. But here's the paradox. Remember the title of the book, The Progress Paradox? Here's what the author writes. Many aspects of our present-day life would strike our recent ancestors as nearly miraculous. Today, we live a long time in comfortable circumstances, enjoy goods and services in almost unlimited supply, and travel where we wish quickly and cheaply. All told, your great-grandparents might say the contemporary United States is the realization of utopia. Yet far from feeling better about their lives, most Americans are feeling worse. The percentage of Americans who describe themselves as happy has not budged since 1950, even though the typical person's income has more than doubled. Depression is 10 times as prevalent today as it was half a century ago. And listen to this. We live in a favored age, yet do not feel favored because we take so much of what we have for granted. And I thought it'd be good to share that with you because we focus so much on what we don't have, and we're reminded every day of what we don't have, that sometimes we just got to remind ourselves of what we do have. It's like what I saw on Twitter this past week. Somebody put this on Twitter. The next time you're tempted to complain, remember that your garbage disposal eats better than 30% of the people in the world. So verse 17, for all us rich people. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. In other words, God gives us what he gives us so that we will enjoy it. It's not wrong to enjoy it. We should enjoy it, but we should not hope in it. We should not find our security in it. And by all means, we should not be ignorant about whatever we have, because we only have it by God's grace, because he gave it to us in the first place. But then it goes on to say this in verse 18. Command them, those who are rich in this present world, you and me, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds. Here's what that means. If you want to overcome the discontentment in your heart, if you want to escape the comparison trap, be rich in good deeds. Do good. You know what that means? It means spend less time at the shopping mall and more time at the rescue mission or at the soup kitchen. Spend less time buying and more time serving people. Because do you know what that does? It gets your eyes off what you think you need and get your eyes on to what other people truly do need. Command those who are rich in this world to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In other words, instead of just spending everything you get and then some on yourself, be generous. Find someone in need. Bless them, share with them. Because you know what that does? It begins to shift our focus. When we begin to serve others, when we begin to give to others and bless others, we're not thinking about ourselves anymore. We're not thinking about all the stuff out there that we wish we had. Now we're starting to think about what someone else really needs. You know, I've made it a point over the years to take both of my kids with me to visit the countries where we have global partnerships. We've been to Kenya, we've been to Haiti. And, you know, as we've traveled through those countries, and we're surrounded by poverty, it's so fascinating to me the conversations that don't happen. You know, when we've been on those trips, I've never had one of my kids say to me, one of my daughters say, hey, Dad, when we get home, can I upgrade my iPhone? You know, Dad, when we get home, can I go to the shopping mall because I just need some more clothes? I've never found myself saying, you know, in those poverty-stricken countries, I've never caught myself saying, you know, when I get home, I need to really upgrade my Chevy Trailblazer because that thing is 10 years old. Now, when you're surrounded by people who have no running water, no indoor plumbing, who will never go to a McDonald's restaurant in their lives, you begin to look at things a little bit differently. It becomes for you an attitude adjustment. And you know what I found? We tend to forget that so quickly. So years ago, I did something. I was in Kenya 10 years ago now with one of our global outreach teams. And when I came back from my trip, I brought this back with me. This is a piece of Kenyan currency. This is, as you can see on the picture, this is 200 Kenyan shillings. This has a value of about $2.50. I carry that in my wallet, and I brought it back with me, and I carry it because I want to remember a conversation I had while I was there. One time while I was there in Kenya, I was talking to a young man by the name of Daniel. And Daniel had a heart for God. Daniel was about 20 years old. Loved God and served in his church. He worked with teenagers, had so many teenagers that he was influencing, and he just wanted to do that for a living. He wanted to be a pastor for a living, but you know the church there couldn't afford to pay him, and so Daniel was a taxi driver. And taxi driving in that part of the world in Kenya can be very dangerous. In fact, he was telling me that one of his friends had been killed just a couple of weeks before that. For one day of taxi driving, Daniel gets paid 200 Kenyan shillings. So I carry this with me because I want to remember that there's a guy in Kenya who would love to do what I do and get paid for it, but instead he's got to drive a taxi and get paid the equivalent of about what I spend on a cup of coffee. And every time I look at that, it's an attitude adjustment for me. And I think a little bit less about what I don't have, and I think a little bit more about what I do have, and how God has blessed me beyond what I really need. When you do good deeds, when you become generous and willing to share, that's an attitude adjustment. Begins to change your heart. And then here's how this ends, verse 19. It says, in this way, by being willing to share, by being rich in good deeds, in this way they will lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age. Jesus talked about that. He said, don't store up treasures on earth where moth and rust corrupt and where thieves break through and steal. Store up treasures in heaven. Paul is just echoing that. They will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age. And I love this phrase, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. I love that phrase, such a powerful phrase, especially for us as Americans, because we are surrounded every day by voices that tell us, you can have life that is truly life. It's just one purchase away. It's one vacation away. It's one upgrade away. You can have life that is truly life for no money down and no interest for 12 months. That is the promise of our culture, that we can find meaning somehow, that we can find life somehow, that we can find fulfillment somehow in all the material things of this world, but it's not true. And oftentimes, it's just a trap. So let me say it one more time. Contentment ends whenever and wherever comparison begins. Now, let me get very, very practical for you. If this is an area of your life where you just need some very practical help and you need some margin and you got to try to figure out how to get your finances under control so you're not living with so much stress and conflict, we offer a class around here. It's called Financial Peace University. And if you've never taken this before and this is something that may help you with some very practical steps, we'd love to see you take it. You can come this Tuesday. It's just starting. 6:30 to 8:30 at our Dixon City campus. There's also a class at our Wilkes-Barre campus. It goes for 9 or 10 weeks, and it features the teaching by video of Dave Ramsey. You may have heard him on the radio. Very, very engaging teacher, very funny guy. But it takes biblical principles of finances, puts them together in a step-by-step process that may be very, very helpful for you. If you're young, I would take this while you're young, even before you're married, so you can get a good start on life. If you're a student, even if you've already made a bunch of mistakes, this is a great way to get some help on that. By the way, there is a cost for the curriculum for this. We don't make any money, but the curriculum you get does cost some money. But if you can't afford it, we will help you to pay for that. So if you want to be a part of Financial Peace, very practical takeaway for this message, indicate that on the back of the connection card. We'll get in touch with you, or you can go on our website, parkerhill.org/FPU. As I wrap up, let me go back to verse 9. Because if you don't remember anything else from this passage, remember verse 9. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. And as I read that, I couldn't help but think about a news story from February of this year. This is a picture of a little boy by the name of Mason. He's 6 years old. And he, believe it or not, is inside a claw machine. You've seen those, haven't you? And there is a story behind this. He was at a restaurant in Florida with his grandmother, and his grandmother lost track of him. And he found a way to climb up through the chute where the toys come out, to climb up into the claw machine to get himself a stuffed toy. But once he got up in there, he was trapped. He couldn't get out. They actually had to call the fire department to get the kid out. And I thought to myself, that's a picture of the way so many of us live in this world today. In our pursuit of more, in our pursuit of something more in terms of experiences or possessions, instead of getting more fulfillment and more contentment, we just get more stress and more debt and more anxiety. And I think there's a better way to live. I believe God loves you too much to live that way and to get caught in the comparison trap. So we're going to have our campus pastors come in just a minute, give you a very practical way to apply the message today. Actually send you home with something that'll be a great little reminder of what we talked about today. So don't go anywhere. The campus pastors are going to come in just a minute. Before they come, let me just pray with you. God, it's been good to be here today. And I pray that what we've learned from the scriptures would not just be theory. It would not just be theology. I pray that it would become for us biography. I pray that you would give us the wisdom to know how to apply this to our own lives, and then give us the courage to do so. Lord, in this world, we're constantly surrounded by reminders of what we don't have. Remind us of what we do have, and primarily your love and your grace in our lives through Jesus Christ. And help us to be content in all circumstances, not to be caught up in the pursuit of stuff and the dissatisfaction and the comparison that are so much a part of our culture, and those things that tend to destroy so many people. I pray, though, that we would be caught up with you, and we would be caught up with your grace and caught up in following you and being the people that you've called us to be for the sake of ourselves and for the sake of this community. And I pray that in Christ's name, amen.